Scottish Parliament elections in May resulted in our most diverse Parliament yet, a very positive development. But today we're here to drill down and discuss how much progress does this actually signal in a political world that needs to be representative of a Scotland with a 4% minority ethnic population. We should also ask why it took so long. What barriers did our members and panellists here today face? And how do we address this issue of political democracy and diversity? To answer these questions, I'm very pleased today to be joined by panellists whom you can read about in more detail on the festival website. But let me introduce Jatin Harrier, the Chief Executive of CRER, Kokab Stewart, who is an MSP for Glasgow Kelvin and Deputy Convener of the Education, Children and Young People Committee, and Faisal Chowdhury. Faisal is an MSP for Lothian and a member of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee.
Well, so I've decided to come back to this video. I did actually make a video on this about a week ago, but as I said in one of the other videos that I made, about halfway through the mic cut out, and I never went back to it because I didn't really get that far into this video, in the video that I made, but I didn't really see the point of doing another video and just covering the second part, because I find it slightly difficult to go over stuff that I've gone over before. You know, it just kind of feels a bit fake and forced. But as luck would have it, as the days have rolled on and I've endured more cancer, I've kind of forgot the vast majority of the shite that was talked about in this little segment here. But just to reiterate what I said last time, in regards to the premise of this is one video of many that the SNP, or the Scottish Government anyway, published onto their YouTube channel. They call it the Festival of Politics 2021. There was a plethora of videos, all the way from should we be vegan, should we stop eating fish, that video that I made that was over an hour long, regarding sustainability in education. You know, it was just all the progressive talking points, of course, because that's where we seem to be at currently in Scotland, the progressive utopia. Just very convenient. Anyhow, I wanted to, before I get into what these wankers say here, and I'll go onto the website to give you a bit of a rundown as to who these people are. Gotta be honest, the only one that I really know is Kebab Stewart, or Kebab Stewart, whatever her name is. The SNP BAME woman who loves to tell everybody that she's BAME every 2 minutes, while simultaneously complaining that she hates being seen as BAME. She just wants to be seen as herself. It's like, well, stop fucking talking about BAME issues then. The guy in the bottom right hand corner, he is relatively new to the Scottish Parliament. Like, came in the last election cycle. He's a Labour MP. He's a non-entity, and I say that because if he done anything of relevance, irrespective of whether or not it's beneficial or irritating, I would have known. Never heard of him, to be honest. And I can barely understand a word he fucking says, to be honest. You know, questions get posed to him, that I do remember, and he kind of goes off topic, so, you know, he could be talking about baked beans for all I know. And the guy in the top right-hand corner, he is the director of SRER, S-R-E-R, the anti-racist charity that works in tandem with the Scottish Government. I'm pretty sure that they played a pivotal role in the anti-racist educational resources that were unveiled into Scottish academia, courtesy of the SNP. So, yeah, but the talk there briefly of representation. You know, immediately this video gets off to a banging start, where it's mentioned that 4% of Scotland's population, according to the last census anyway, was 4%. It was BAME, sorry. Therefore, it stands to reason that in this instance, 4% of Parliament should be BAME. And because 4% of the Parliament is not BAME, that somehow indicates some form of inequality. An inequality that needs to be rectified. A disparity that would indicate some form of barrier or glass ceiling, racism, oppression, etc., etc. You know, the usual shit. But this talk of representation, proportional representation, is something that, you know, I've briefly touched upon before in many videos, purely because currently, with Scotland's population being overwhelmingly white, it doesn't seem like that much of an issue. But the reality of the matter is that this is essentially what I would consider it to be a slow power grab. You know, a patiently waiting game. But it's a power grab all the same, because if 4% of the Parliament has to be BAME to represent or reflect, the population's percentage of BAMEs, stands to reason then when the population increases to, say, 10% BAME, that the Parliament would have to be 10% BAME. 15% of the population is BAME, then the Parliament would have to replicate that, and so on and so forth. Till we get to a point where, say, 20, 30 years from now, the Parliament could be majority BAME because the population is majority BAME. And equally, of course, you would have to have less and less white representation because the percentage of the whites in the country would be on the decline. We could also go into the other argument of how stupid this is from a bunch of people, especially the guy in the top right-hand corner who professes to the cows come home that race doesn't exist. You know, whites went around the world and they racialized everybody, treated them as subordinate, etc., etc. You know, ethnicity is key, but yet they lump all whites in together. Where's the arguments for Polish representation, Lithuanian representation, German representation, etc.? No, it's white representation. But when it comes to the BAMEs, it's a different matter entirely. Strange that. Very strange. I mean, essentially Polish people are ethnic minorities, they're not. If we're going to look into the worldview of people who profess that race doesn't exist, it's all about ethnicity, then Polish are an ethnic minority in Scotland. Where is the argument for Polish representation? There isn't one. Why? Because they're white. But on the subject of increased population percentage, therefore there has to be the equal amount of representation in a specific work field. A video that I made a while ago titled "Scottish Schools Are Racist, Say the Anti-Racists." It was based mainly on this, teaching in a diverse Scotland, increasing and retaining minority ethnic teachers, and it was a report aiming to increase the number of teachers from underrepresented groups at all levels in Scottish schools. And it goes on to say here, briefly, changing demographics in many contemporary Western countries, including Scotland, has resulted in multi-ethnic societies. Despite this, the teaching workforce has not kept pace with the increased diversity of the student population across many of these countries. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. The point that I wanted to specifically address, for some strange reason, has disappeared. But luckily, as I said, I made a video on it at the time. Final point seems to be missing from here, but it says here that whilst much has been achieved through the diversity in the teaching profession working group to create the structural conditions for change, there's clearly much more still to do in order to realise our collective ambition of a teaching workforce which reflects Scotland's diversity. In terms of numbers, small improvements have been seen in recent years. However, the 2022 population census will likely mean that the target set in the original report of 4% will need to be revised. What does that mean? Well, likelihood will be that there will be an increase from that previous 4%. So, I don't know, argument's sake, say 6%, 7% or something. Therefore, that would then mean that in this instance, the teaching workforce, they would strive to achieve 6 or 7, whatever it may be BAME. And then the same would be true of the Parliament. This is the sort of angle they're going for here. You know, all the arguments currently with the feminists, it has to be 50-50, and until such a time as it is 50-50, that somehow indicates gender inequality. The same thing is true with the BAME rhetoric, and that is that if it does not match the percentage of the population, that somehow indicates inequality. It needs to be proportionate representation, because that is equality. Fuck off, it's equity, and it's equality of outcome. But they know that. They just don't give a shit. They camouflage their true agenda behind cries of racism. Another little example before I get into the actual video is this wanker here, who I have to be honest, I'm very upset that he wasn't part of this panel. I'm surprised he wasn't, actually, because he's normally the go-to guy to tell you that racism is rife in Scotland and microaggressions are around every single corner. Graham Anti-White Campbell with his BLM poster behind him, here to tell you all about representation.
So what were the three main asks that demonstrators had of us? There were three of them. They were calling for decolonization of the curriculum in recognition of the slavery legacy. That means that the Scottish education system needs to be tackling institutionalized discrimination, whether it's in teacher employment, as Corcab Stewart spoke about yesterday, or whether it's in the actual curriculum taught by primary and secondary level teachers. We need a specialist unit that coordinates that legacy across the board. We also talked about removing institutional barriers to public life and employment. We need to lift the approach that we've had so far, which tends to tick boxes but doesn't actually set targets for organisations to achieve results. Now, I'm proud.
What does he mean by these results? Well, of course, he's meaning representation. Mm-hmm.
That as a Glasgow City Councillor, I moved a motion which did exactly that, gave us an aspirational target to achieve a much higher representation of black employees amongst our staff. We currently have about 2%. We are aiming to get to 6% by the end of our term here.
See, it's all about that percentage points. Now, technically, it should be 4%, but no, he's conveniently referring to Glasgow's BAME population. You get the point. So, anyway, this was the website here, just briefly. It's just one little thing I want to touch upon here with this guy. This is progression, folks. So, the non-entity that I talked about earlier was born in Bangladesh, moved to Manchester before settling in Edinburgh, and he's been there for about 40 years. So, he moved, obviously, to the UK as a child, so irrespective, he's still a foreign national. But not only is he a foreign national who's now an MP or an MSP in Scotland, he's a foreign national who's now an MSP in Scotland who's on a panel to whine and moan about representation or lack thereof. And of course, it even says down here that, oh no, sorry, I'm getting confused with this ball bag, that he's got a keen interest in race and representation, which of course he does. As it says here, that he's the executive director of the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, an anti-racist social policy charity that works to address issues of structural racism across Scotland. This is their fucking website here, talking about promoting racial equality, aka equity. But this guy here, so he's a foreign national, the absolute audacity, the fucking gall to come to this country, obviously through no fault of his own, he was a child, but to then sit on a panel and whine and moan. That is when you can make sense of what he's actually saying. As I said, it's mouthful of marbles. But just remarkable. I mean, I can't picture myself sitting in a Bangladeshi parliament or a parliament similar. We're all exchanging. I'm gonna make a fucking joke about these people. I'm not going down that route. But the point I was gonna say, was that then taking the time to complain that all my counterparts were brown and there wasn't enough roots for whites to get into positions of power. Pretty sure they would all look at me and want to call me all the racist slurs under the sun. And they'd be justified in doing so. In fact, they probably would just do it because they wouldn't have the fear of a hate crime bill looming over them. Anyhow, I have now rambled for 12 minutes, but yeah, I really just wanted to stress that point of proportional representation, because I think out of the vast majority of the things that the BAMEs constantly dribble on about, that is the biggest con job of the lot, And as I think a lot of people, they don't really see the severity of what that really indicates in the long term, because currently, as things stand, with Scotland being so vastly white, they don't see it as an issue. But as the population begins to shrink, it will become more of an apparent issue. And you've got to also bear in mind that these people are pushing for this sort of thing to be implemented everywhere. CEOs, the police, council, schools, teachers, parliament, etc. Positions of power. It's a power grab. Well, that's how I view it anyway. It makes no fucking sense. In the world that they try to present to you, but as I say, they masquerade their true intentions. We're all one, etc., but nah, are we? Fuck. Clearly not. Oh, I should also add that this guy here, his mic is relatively shite, to put it bluntly, so there might be a bit of tomfoolery on my end when it comes to subtitles and screen changes and whatnot. From what I remember though, my setup was able to kind of pick up what he was saying, so it sounded alright when you played it back. But, it can be a bit tedious to listen to, or attempt to, anyhow.
But I'd like to begin by asking each of our panellists, what's your perception on the state of play with political diversity and representation in Scotland today? I'm going to go first to Kokab, then Faisal, and then Jatin. So may I ask Kokab to respond?
Thanks, Alison. That's such an important question, and I'm delighted to be part of this event today. It's good to keep this at the top of the agenda. So we have got a bit of a breakthrough. My worry is that if we take the focus off representation of underrepresented groups, then we might go backwards. In the past, that has happened when it's come to 50-50 sort of like female sort of like representatives in elected democratic structures. So I think that, 21 years it's taken me. It was 21 years ago that I was the first woman of colour, or the first person of colour, to actually stand for any kind of parliament. That was the first Scottish Parliament elections, of course, but I'm including Westminster there as well. So that is progress, but it has taken far too long. And that probably, as we go on through our discussions today, we'll probably come back to some of the multiple barriers that I have certainly faced. And I'm happy to discuss them today, but also my peer groups as well, many women of colour in particular, but also people of colour.
In hindsight, I really wish I could have known she was going to ramble on there, because it would have just cut the latter half of the pish that she came away with. But interesting point that she raised at the beginning there when she referenced going backwards, and we can't allow that to happen, or we shouldn't allow that to happen. And she went on to allude to, nearing 50% female representation, then it went backwards, as if going backwards is somehow regression. We have to go forwards. This is a feminist talking point that's been reoccurring over the years. Well, in all the time that I've paid any attention to Scottish politics, it's been a reoccurring theme quite a lot. Where they always go on about the need to ensure that it never goes backwards again, and it continues to go forward until we reach at least 50% female representation. I love the little caveat there, it's at least, so it could be 60% female representation. That would be fine, but because it's under 50, that's a problem. But now we're talking about BAMEs, and we can't allow it to go backwards. Now, forgive my ignorance here, but I thought that every election cycle, it was a chance for fresh faces potentially, and people to prove their worth, etc. But no. Not in the eyes of people that proclaim that we need to have things on paper appearing equal. Oh, no. Things have to remain exactly as they are, or better. They cannot go backwards. We can't have fresh faces, because they might be white. They might be men. Can't have that. And if I remember correctly, one of the two BAME men goes on to talk about, oh yeah, it's the guy at the top right. In fact, I'll just play it. But before I do, fuck's sake, I would just want to, when they talk about progress, what are we exactly progressing to? Why is it described as progress? Because all of a sudden there's BAMEs in our parliament. Why are BAMEs sitting on a panel, courtesy of the Scottish Government, proclaiming that it's progress because there's now BAMEs or more BAMEs in our parliament? Why is that progress? Why is that being seen as a good thing and described as progress? And again, where are we progressing to? All this talk of progress, but yet I don't really ever seem to see the answer as to where we're progressing to, or hear the answer, I should say. No, that's just left for us all to imagine. Might be progress to these people, but I find it relatively strange. As I said earlier on, we're all told continuously that we're all one, the human race, etc., but yet less white the better. That's progress, or less male and white, I should say. Pale, male and stale, as they say, yeah.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to the Festival of Politics for joining us again every month. So that's just fantastic, and I think every other institution should do something to mark Black History Month as well. In terms of the question, I think echoing what the previous two people have said, yeah, it's great. It's great we've got 6 BME representatives. It's great we've got our first 2 women in BME women in Parliament. But there's, as Colcab said, we've got to keep an eye that it's not just a one-off thing, and it's...
See? We've got to keep an eye that it's not just a one-off thing. But even if it was, as I said, Parliament, every election cycle is supposed to be a potential for changing, the change of faces. Fresh faces, old faces, And people that can prove their worth might have a chance of retaining their seat. But these people want to ensure that, irrespective of whether or not they're shit at their job, Hamza Yusuf, I'm looking at you, pal. You get to keep your seat anyway. That's what they want. They want to ensure that the BAME percentage that they've already got in the Parliament, that stays as it is, and it can never go back. Can't allow it to be a one-off. Why? Is that regression?
It's too easy to lose the gains that have been made.
There's gains have been made.
I think hope people won't contradict me, maybe they will, but Boysel and Pam, I think their election was unexpected by some, in terms of numbers. I'm not talking about them personally. And COCAB would not have got a seat if Sandra White had not been resigning. So these gains are great, but they're not embedded in the system as yet. And until we embed these things, the danger of going backwards is so high.
So it's not embedded in the system as of yet.
Of South Asian origin. There's still a way to go about other ethnicities being represented in Parliament. And at the end of the day, though, it's not, I mean, representation is very important, but for us, it's about what anti-racist action will be taken by the Parliament. And the two things don't always go together. In the, you know, we did some study of 20 years of devolution and how race had been considered. And there were far more discussion of race in chamber debates in the first two sessions of Parliament when there were no BME representatives. So that's something, I mean, I'm not putting all the focus on BME politicians to make that happen. I think it's up to the parties and the leadership of the parties. But yeah, it's something to watch out for. Obviously, we'll see what happens in the council elections coming up next year. But we need to embed these gains into the system somehow.
We need to embed these things into the system somehow. So it's the second reference he's made to embedding it into the system. Now, of course, I just want to stress that naturally, people sitting on a panel ain't going to change anything systemically in Scotland or politically or whatever. And you could make the argument that I'm essentially just reacting to twats sitting on a panel. But the reality of the matter is that this gives you a little bit of insight as to what's really going on behind the scenes, as the guy in the top right hand corner playing a pivotal role, working in tandem with the government in regards to anti-racist education. And of course, there is talk constantly in the background. Granted, the COVID hysteria, the coof, is kind of taking centre stage, but in the background, these things haven't gone away. This is the sort of direction of travel that we are headed for. So it stands to reason that you're going to see panels like this from time to time. Naturally, they want more of these panels to occur, and they want change to come on the back of the panels, but in the meantime, you're going to have to make do with the panels. So the point is, that's the only reason that I'm talking about this, and I'm not going to go for the entirety of the video, even though I haven't actually seen the latter half of it, because I'm conscious of the time. I don't want to make another fucking hour-long video, but I just what does today say that like? But anyway,
otherwise,
start there, embed it into the system. So he doesn't really elaborate in regards to what he means by that, but you can kind of guess, you know, essentially make it some sort of law that it has to remain, there has to be at least 6 BAME politicians in the Parliament, the same way that they're pushing for 50-50 female to male representation at least. They want to now do the same with the BAMEs. And this isn't the first time I've heard this rhetoric. No, it's not. But, you know, never gets old when you do hear it again. Embed it into the system. I really would love for him to actually elaborate on what he means by that, but we all know.
There's great danger we'll lose them.
Thank you all. So I think the message that we're hearing loud and clear is that progress isn't necessarily linear. We can't take it for granted. We can't think that this is necessarily the first step towards the truly representative parliament that we all want to see, and that we have to make sure that there's no slippage from now on, that there is only progress. So, you know, we've got a chance to explore how we make sure that that happens. And I know what Jatin's saying, that there were more debates on the issue of diversity previously, so we mustn't assume that because we have a more diverse parliament that we need to stop debating and discussing it. So can I ask what you see as the barriers in encouraging more Scots from minority ethnic backgrounds to enter the world of politics on a community or council or national level? Can I put that question first to Faisal, then to Jatin, and then to Kokab?
Thank you very much, Alison. I would say racism caused...
Of course, man. What a fucking hot take, pal. What a hot take.
Networks and prejudice. I mean, do the institution seems flexible and responsive to change? This is the first time in Scotland that asylum seekers and refugees have been able to vote alongside the rest of the population. And this should be welcomed. And having the vote...
It's really hard to get your head around when you understand that this man is a foreign national. And he's sitting on a panel as an MSP in our parliament claiming that people that didn't even migrate here have just come over here, chancing their arm. Hello, I'm from Syria, I swear. Even though he's jet black, you know, and he's got a Kenyan tattoo in his arm. But, you know, he gets his claim accepted, and lo and behold, now he can vote in our elections, and that's a good thing, apparently. No, it's fucking not. It's not a good thing. And fundamentally, the Scottish people were never asked. And I was going to elaborate and reiterate something I said in my infamous BitChute video, but look what happened to my tenure in BitChute as a result of that. But yeah, least said the better, I guess. But to put it nicely, I guess, can't leave people hanging. Just essentially eradicating the differences between people who aren't Scottish to those who are Scottish, bit by bit, offer that global citizenship,
When it comes to, I hear what Jatin is saying about the onus being on political parties. The political parties
just to, I'm conscious of time, so I'm cutting shit out, but to kind of paraphrase what he said, the baldy guy at the top right, he basically implied that some parties really should take some of the responsibility and look at themselves. Then went on to make claims that some of the BAMEs that stood for, council elections and whatnot in recent times and elections in general, made claims of racism directed towards them, not just from voters apparently, but from the parties themselves and the activists, etc. It's the same shit all the time. But anyhow,
made up of people from society. So I would say that it is actually incumbent on everybody to be actually checking, one, possibly their own privilege, and also checking in their own biases and their own stereotypical views. It's an interesting one with racism. We absolutely know exists. We know it exists. And yet, it is actually very difficult to accuse somebody of it.
It's also very difficult these days to prove. It's very, very difficult to prove because it's a word these days, especially when it comes from the people on screen or people like them. It's a word that's ever changing. The definition can be whatever the fuck they want it to be. Goalposts have expanded exponentially to the point that you can't see them anymore. And every day they expand that a little bit further. And of course, now that they've coined all these new terms for racism, all the different variations, and microaggressions being the one I find the most laughable, but the one that's probably the most convenient for these people, because it can literally be whatever the fuck they want it to be. But I love that though. So racism is very difficult to accuse somebody of racism. That's because you just assume that negative outcomes or disparities can be placed down to racism. Reminds me of Anas Sarwar a few years ago when he made the claim that some guy in his party said to him that nobody would vote for I can't remember if it was him or his wife, but Scotland wouldn't vote for a brown Muslim party. That was the words that was allegedly used. No proof at all, but it's easy for these people to claim that something was said to them. It inevitably went to court, and if I remember rightly, something happened which resulted in Anas Sarwar not getting to court in time or something, and he claims that he was screwed. I think what really happened there was he was saved, because had that gone to court properly with him being there, it would have turned out that there was no proof at all. So
to call it out, we all say you should call it out, call out racism, whether policies, procedures, rules that are set by political parties or any other body, actually, any other selection body. It's the same in recruitment processes and jobs.
Recruitment processes. This is the first time I've heard her referring to recruitment processes, but it's also not the first time that I've heard other BAMEs in Scotland referring to recruitment processes. And that's actually a better example than the one I used regarding Anas Sarwar, because they always claim that BAMEs suffered discrimination in the hiring practices. And you will say, well, how's that? What's the proof? Well, they didn't get the job. It's like, okay. And then, of course, we're supposed to live in a meritocracy, but these people are hell-bent on changing that, of course. But, and as I've said before, my Sargon hot take, if there's 50 people applying for a job and 49 of them happen to be white, and one of them happens to be BAME, the likelihood is that a white person will get that job. Not because they're white, but because there's more whites than there is the BAME. But you then have to take into consideration that the 49 whites will be competing against each other for that same job, the same as they're competing against the BAME, and vice versa. But the BAME in question views those whites as a block. So when he doesn't get the job and one of the whites does, that's a win for the whites as a whole and a loss for BAMEs as a whole. Then he comes away from said job interview and claims that he didn't get it because he's fucking BAME. That is really what it boils down to. And you might get some anti-racist academic or expert who will say, oh no, you're talking shite. No, I'm not, because I've read enough of your pish to know exactly what you are talking about and what you really mean. These people actually should be embarrassed that a 26-year-old man can rip apart their fucking shit. And, I'm getting pretty fucking good at it, considering I've been doing it for long enough. And the embarrassing thing about it is their rhetoric never changes. It doesn't need to, because there's never any pushback, or significant pushback anyway. They're allowed to push their petty, pathetic, false narratives with little to no pushback. Same is true for the feminists, of course. Should also mention that the feminist equivalent of this video, the same bollocks that was espoused in the hour-plus video that I made regarding these people a couple of weeks ago, where it was titled Feminist Outcomes Will Stop Murder. You know, there was a woman there talking in the video that came out at the same time as this one, and she goes on to start saying that there's so much more that needs to be done in regards to gender inequality. We still don't have 50-50 representation in Parliament, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's all they care about. It's implementing their outcomes. It's equality of outcome. Not equality of opportunity, it's equality of outcome. They'll say equality, but what they really mean is equity. They want it all their own way. They want power. They want quote-unquote representation, which really just means they want their own in there to benefit their own. It's fucking embarrassing, really is it? Anyway, half an hour now, Jesus Christ, I'm only 50 minutes into this shit show.
As well, where ethnic minorities are also underrepresented in many spheres, including in teaching, especially when it comes to promoting.
Underrepresented. Again, this talk of representation, just the word irritates me, like.
Posts.
Well, especially when it comes to promoted posts. It's interesting, there's an article, a report, I think, from Glasgow Council, and BAMEs are now claiming that, you know, it's all about who you know when it comes to promotions. So Glasgow Council are actively taking steps to not only increase the teaching workforce in Glasgow to better represent and reflect Glasgow society, but they're doing things specifically to ensure that BAMEs get promoted, you know, giving them work experience, etc. So they're taking them aside, prioritising them in order for them to then in turn, in time, achieve better outcomes. And a point I've made before when this exact same point has been raised in a different video is the fact that you could go up to the vast majority of teachers in any school and ask them if they've been offered a promotion or if they've had a promotion. The vast majority will say no. Promotions don't grow on trees. They're a rarity. But the BAMEs, oh, they're underrepresented. Yeah, well, so are the vast majority of teachers in any school. So it's just, again, it's because they're a minority, so it's going to look like it's even worse for them on paper. It's a fucking joke when it comes to promoted posts. So you just think that they're not being hired or promoted because they're BAME? I mean, fuck off. You even think that would be remotely possible when they got people like this constantly crying and whining about racism and looking for anything to prove that it exists? Oh, man.
And people, you know, the rules have not been created with input from people from underrepresented groups.
Oh, the rules have not been created with people from underrepresented groups included. You know, this is one of a few occasions that I remember where something similar is referenced. Something regarding candidate when it comes to picking candidates for elections and whatnot. They claim as well that, you know, there's not enough BAMEs. It's very, very white male. They pick all the candidates, and if there was some BAMEs in there, then we might see more BAMEs getting picked for candidacy, etc., etc. Same thing there, kind of being alluded to, referencing rules and whatnot. So what? So if we had BAMEs there, the rules would be different. The rules would benefit BAMEs somehow. Why is that exactly? Is that your way of trying to tell us subtly that you want BAMEs in there to change the rules, or BAMEs in there that would specifically benefit you? Are you trying to also insinuate then that currently as things stand, things are in place to benefit whites? Whites make the rules and they benefit whites because they're white? We all know that's shite. The only people that claim that it's not shite is people like this. Fucking joke, man. So they want BAMEs into these positions, whether it's to pick candidates or whether it's when it comes to adapting, or creating or overseeing rules. They want BAMEs in there. Why? Because the rules could be then changed or whatever it may be to benefit BAMEs, to provide better outcomes for BAMEs. So the argument is that currently, without the BAME representation when it comes to making rules, things do not benefit BAMEs. So we need BAMEs in there to rectify that issue. Oh, how fucking convenient is that, eh? Things won't change until we get BAMEs in positions of power. Common theme.
And that's what I found, is that, as soon as I sort of jump through one barrier, one hurdle, another one appears, and another one appears.
Chance of winning, really. The law is still unclear about whether we can have all black shortlists and things. You don't have to praise the SNP for taking that.
Oh, black shortlists, I mean, that's coming. Oh, shit.
Action of promoting some of their minority candidates top off lists, unfortunately not the winnable lists, not the winnable regions. But it goes back to, we need parties to have a much more diverse membership to start with. As Scott was saying, these are made up of individual people, of the general public. But we have no data about party membership and ethnicity.
So parties also need to have diverse memberships. Okay. Don't know how you're going to get that.
So until we get a fair representation in membership.
Until we get fair representation in membership. See the way that they word these fucking phrases. Fair representation in membership. Now, memberships to parties are made up organically, for a start. But just the talk, fair representation. So what they mean is memberships to be less white and more BAME. But they disguise it as just fair representation. That's what we're after. Now, your problem is it's too white. Always sugarcoating what they really mean, man.
Shit. It's going to be hard to get fair representation in selected people.
So, until we get fair representation, quote unquote, of membership, it's going to be hard to get fair representation in selected people. See? So, obviously the membership picks the selected candidates for these by-elections, or what was the... I can't for the life of me remember what the seats were called that the SNP shoehorned in disabled people and BAMEs for the last election. But nonetheless, it's the party membership that picks these candidates, or votes for these candidates even. So what he's trying to say is if the membership was more BAME, the likelihood would be that you would get more BAMEs selected. So the implication, of course, is because there isn't enough BAMEs currently, whites are voting for whites because they're white. And in order to rectify that or combat that, we need BAMEs in there to vote for BAMEs. So they're open and honest in regards to telling you what they really want, and that is their own in there, so they can vote for their own. They have no intention of voting for whitey if they can avoid it. It's remarkable. It really is fucking remarkable.
Except that. So there's a lot more work to be done to make sure political parties represent the people of Scotland. And then everything sort of flows from there. We need to make sure that there's fair representative activists, fair representative councillors, and then fair representative MSPs. Talk about backroom staff, which are also very important in parties. Do we have any data about ethnicity?
If only the parties could have brown tea pourers, things would change. Fuck's sake.
We're not reaching out to them. When I was talking to people from ethnic minority background, what their voice was that when it comes to decision making, there is hardly anybody. And I think Koka touched on that. When you go into people selecting candidates or making decisions, there's hardly anybody from ethnic minority background. So I think
There is again. So again, the assumption is that whites are voting for whites because they're white. In order to combat that, we need BAMEs in there to vote for BAMEs because they're BAME. If only there was BAMEs there as well as whites, then there would probably be more BAME candidates, etc., etc., etc. The usual shite. It's just total bollocks. Absolute bollocks. And it's not just any BAMEs as well. You have to take that into consideration. It's not just any old BAME that they want in there. Oh, no. It has to be a BAME that sees things the same way as they do, with the anti-racist lens. Because if we have a BAME in there who's quote-unquote colourblind and doesn't really see any differences between the races, we're all one and all that shite, then they might see no problem with selecting a white over a black when it comes to candidacy selection. But an anti-racist, they would never, ever do that. No. They would always home in on any and all BAMEs and ensure that as many as possible were picked. As many as possible rules were implemented to benefit said BAMEs, etc. So it has to be a very specific type of BAME in these positions. Same with the feminists, actually. When they talk about needing females in Parliament, they don't mean normal females. No, they have to be feminists. Anyway.
think there's, as I said at the beginning, more work has to be done, and everyone, and what Jatin said, all parties need to look into their policies, and we have to find a way. And where we are, I don't think it's good enough.
I don't think it's good enough. Well, go fuck yourself. You're not even Scottish, eh?
Thank you, Faisal. So from our conversation there, I'm picking up on the need for an intersectional approach. Let's not just simply focus on race or gender or class, but let's tackle all of these issues, and clearly support from our panellists for,
Or we could just ditch the term intersectionality because it's a cancer, and we can just go back to how things used to be, a simple meritocracy, in theory. We can't have that. Oh, no, we cannot have that, because this is the day and age of equality of outcome. Equity is rife, or lack thereof.
for affirmative action for.
Oh, affirmative action. Fuck off, man. This is round about the point where I got to last time when I tried to make this video. I mean, as I said, I'm only 20 minutes in. It's an hour long. So I probably will not get to find out what they say towards the end of this video, because there's no way in hell that I'm going to make this video excessively long. But, it's the next question I remember now that really pissed me off. And, yeah, I'll just let it play.
Quotas, perhaps, for a really, for an embedding of action that means it's not a lottery, that it's not accidental, that we really do everything that we can to promote diversity.
Oh, is that right? It's funny though, because you're now implying that, the white guy, or the white woman even, they would have to give it their all when it comes to the election, or at the very least they have to work for their money. They have to work to try and get their seat back, whereas you just want BAMEs to be slotted in because of BAME. Why? I don't know. It's funny because the boot at the bottom left-hand corner, all the years she tried to become an MSP in Scotland. All the years, never got voted in. She'd tell you it's because of racism, of course, but, the only reason she's in now is because she stood in an area where there was an MP, or an MSP, who was standing down. So, essentially, it was an easy win this time around, eh? Yeah. I love that, though. So, it's not just a lottery, we have to embed it into the system. I mean, fuck off, absolute bullshit.
I have a question.
I actually want to say this as well. What's in the top of my head? It's something that really doesn't get stressed enough. Why do we need BAME quote representation? What is it? Because they're brown? Is that it? No, it's not, obviously, because as I said, they have to fit the status quo when it comes to anti-racist ideology and whatnot. But they will always tell you. I remember Rosa, Sally, and all that doing it around about the election time, when they were all expecting to get into the parliament because the SNP, as I said, shoehorned them into the top of their respective seats. Regional lists, there you go. I knew I fucking remembered it. They kept reminding us that them being in the parliament would represent all of society, all of Scotland would be represented under them, BAMEs included. But they weren't just there for the BAME. No. They were there to represent the entirety of Scotland. Okay. If that's all it is, then essentially a white person could do that. What's the difference between a white person standing in the parliament? Because that white person effectively would be representing the entirety of society, irrespective of whether or not you were white or not. But that wasn't good enough. That isn't good enough, because you don't see yourself. So immediately there is something that's different there. The issue is because the parliament's white and you're not white. So you could look at it from the angle that this is pathetic people with identity crises, and as a result they're lashing out and want change. You could look at it that way, but I suppose there's an argument to be made there. But the reality of the matter is, there is no difference between what a BAME and a white person would do in that seat if all they were doing is representing the entirety of society. The reality of the matter is, it's not really about representing society. It's about getting their own into positions of power. That's what it's about. That's what it will always be about. And that's what it is.
From our audience, this is from Mustak in Leicester, and the question is, hi all, should Afro-Scottish history be added to the curriculum in schools? And I'm going to go to CoCab, and then Faisal, and then Jatin.
Thank you, Alison. To answer that particular question, I think that decolonisation of the curriculum has already started to a certain extent.
Yeah. She goes on to talk about...
And I do applaud the various council local authorities across Scotland that have already taken that on, but we have much further to go on that. I've been a teacher for about 30 years, and at that time, during that time, I've had to actively sort of like seek out.
She goes on to talk about like BAMEs under the British Empire that fought in the war, etc., and how they were never talked about. But it's the term decolonizing the curriculum. What that really means in this instance, anyway, is that the curriculum currently is too. You've heard the term Eurocentric. Well, it's too Scottish-centric or white-centric, so it needs to be more diversified. It needs to have more talking points of BAMEs, And we need to obviously know all about slavery, which then feeds into then teaching the children all about how the slavery of old, the past, that seeps into the modern day. The structures, the systems of systemic structural oppression, etc. All ties in, giving credence to the crybaby routines from people like this. It's a fucking con job, man. I swear to God, But just skip her shite because the video is getting long.
From a broader level, I absolutely agree that we need to decolonize the curriculum so that we get a more accurate history that is actually more relevant to our youngsters, and they can see their heritage.
Whoa. See, so it's more relevant, and so they can see their heritage. So immediately, what she's just implied there is that currently, as things stand, history in school, Scottish history, is somewhat irrelevant to non-Scottish people, blacks, browns, and until it includes or incorporates elements that resemble the BAMEs in question, the Indians and the Africans, etc., so they can see their heritage being spoken about, etc., until such a time it will always remain irrelevant. The fucking cheek of this bitch to sit there and say that children in Scotland learning about Scottish and by extension British history in Scotland is fucking irrelevant. It's irrelevant, partly. Now, I'll tell you what was irrelevant really for me when I was in school was learning to no end about the Holocaust. That was quite irrelevant. But when we learned about the wars of Scottish independence, etc., that was relatively interesting. That was relevant to me. But I guess if I was black, that would be irrelevant. Oh, that's the problem, pal. You're living in Scotland. But no, this is the modern day. This is the 21st century. We're all global citizens. So of course, Scottish history needs to open its arms and adopt and include shite about the Congo, etc., so they can see their heritage, so we can learn about the contributions that Pakistanis and Indians made during World War II. As if the focal point during any lessons about World War II during school focus solely on the fact that the people in question were white. We don't learn enough about the Indians, etc. Oh, fucking wow. Okay. Right, you've got a wee argument that can be made there, I guess. We can include that. But really, decolonizing the curriculum, And it's the assumption that if we include this shit, that will somehow appeal and include or promote inclusion to BAMEs. It's a fucking... whatever, man.
And the essential role that they have played and their heritage has played in the advancement of the world, really.
Oh yeah, Pakistan. Yeah, they've made great strides to advancing the world. Pakistan. Fucking Pakistan. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, CoCab. Can I put that question to Faisal?
Much, Alison. I totally agree. Black history needs to be part of the curriculum.
I always find it funny when non-black BAMEs say that shit. Do they think that also then includes by extension their own history, or are they just referring to black history? Why are we prioritising black over brown? Surely there should be an argument to be made about brown history. And a point I made at the beginning of the video, if we're going to go down this route of underrepresentation for ethnic minorities, should we then have segments about Polish history and Lithuanian, and Bulgarian, Hungarian, Slovakian, Serbian, even English? English people are a fucking minority in Scotland. What about them? Just saying, we're all white, fucking black history. Oh, it needs to be part of the curriculum since the foreign national. Fuck off, Oh, come on, man.
History should be, told fully, and children need to be taught. I mean,
they need to be
in my previous role as a chair of Edinburgh and Lothian Regional Equality Council, I've worked very closely with quite a lot of schools, and listening to the students from ethnic minority background, the stories I've heard were very, very painful. And quite a lot of people were doing stuff, but they were not aware of that they are hurting other people by doing.
Oh, okay. So, if we include Black history into the curriculum, that will eradicate the presumably microaggressions and the unconscious bias, etc., that he's referring to, or he's about to refer to. Yeah. So if we just teach the children all about Black history and the wonderful contributions Pakistanis have made to the advancement of the world, according to kebab students, that will stop the racism, the rife, potent racism. I mean, fuck off. Again, it's kind of the equivalent of putting people in the positions of power, to get better outcomes. It's the same principle, essentially. Just shoe on in BAME history. And apparently, in this instance, it will achieve better outcomes in the long run.
Doing this, for example, if you go to a Muslim girl and pull her hijab and say, "Oh, what's under your scarf?" That's people, or if you go.
I can't say one way or the other whether or not that happens, but I find that difficult to believe. The reason being, of course, that it's one of those things that always gets coined as something that's rife. The same as feminists will always say that they can't walk from A to B without being wolf whistled relentlessly and catcalled by men all the time. It's a frequent daily occurrence. They can't escape it. Same thing's kind of true with the BAMEs. They've got a few things that they'll always go to, and that's one of them. The hijab being pulled off all the time. Another one is blacks getting their hair touched, or people will ask to touch their hair all the time. Fucking don't buy that shite either, okay? I might have believed that when blacks first came to the UK. For example, my granddad, the first time I ever seen a black person was in London when he was 18 years of age. He left here. He went down to London in search of work. That was the first time he ever seen a black person. And yeah, guess what he did? When he was chatting to the guy, he asked to touch his fucking hair. Now, I could believe that back then. I do not believe that now. I really, it's just, and even if there was one instance of that occurring, they always say it all the fucking time. It's as common as rain in Scotland, apparently. I don't buy it. It's shit.
Go to an African person and say, touch his hair and say,
you just said it.
or her hair and say, is that how you were born? So there is.
He literally, oh fucking god! Oh well, you couldn't make that up. You couldn't make it up. But yeah, if we just implement anti-racist education, then nobody will ever go up to an African kid again and ask to touch his hair. I mean, as if it happened in the first place.
A lot of things we have to teach our children from the very young age, and I totally agree that it's got to be part of the curriculum. Wales has done that. Why can't we? We should learn from each other, and I think if Wales can do it, we can do it as well in Scotland.
Thanks, Faisal. Can I put that question to Jatin, the influence of what we learn in schools on acceptance and boosting diversity in all our public bodies?
Boosting diversity in all our public bodies. What? What the fuck's that got to do with anti-racist education or a Black history?
I agree with the previous two speakers. It's not about acceptance. I'm going to use another phrase which I also don't like using. It's about normalizing Black people.
Oh, it's about normalising Black people. Now, why would you need to normalise Black people in Scotland? Just curious on that front. Could it be that before 2001, Black people in Scotland were very, 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 very few and far between, and arguably still are to a large extent in large swathes of the country, unless you're living in Edinburgh or Glasgow. But normalising Black people. That's shades of the anti-racist education that was implemented a few months back, where a large portion of it is talking about normalising diversity. Why would you need to do this? Yeah, it's about brainwashing children in particular to come round to the concept of becoming an ever-shrinking minority and accepting the progressive sustainable development regime, global citizenship, normalising their fates. Yeah.
Looking at the Black presence in Scotland, but also Scotland's role in the world, especially in empire and colonialism.
Yes, browbeat me, Daddy, govern me harder.
The day it's all about challenging racism. That's why we have Black
the rife racism, of course. Yes.
hopefully work across the whole year, not just in 1 month. That's why we're campaigning for a National Museum of Slavery, Empire, Colonialism and Migration.
I think he said museum there as opposed to region, as the subtitle suggested, but oh yeah, we'll just create a museum. I'm pretty sure there is a museum that's in the pipeline. Remember that being announced at some point, but if we just have a museum dedicated to talking about slavery, empire, colonialism and migration, that will end the racism that apparently is rife. Yeah, but that little bit at the end there, migration. So what does that mean? Of course, that's to normalise the concept of black and brown immigration to the UK. Because of colonialism, that's why you're seeing migration now, all this shite. You don't need me to repeat talking points that other people have said on many occasions, but when I even refer to the Windrush, etc., we didn't need these people, nor were they even wanted by the vast majority of the United Kingdom, but they were shoehorned here anyway. But they will tell you a different version of events where they will say that we needed them, and ever since then they've contributed greatly. Some may very well have, but they were still unwanted at the time, and this is the end product. Fat bald men, brown BAME bald fat men sitting here, running charities, promoting the idea and the concept that Scotland's inherently racist, championing the idea of shoehorning in BAMEs into positions of power, and arguing that we should have museums and education revamps, etc., dedicated to the cause of promoting anti-racism. Go fuck yourself. It's cancer. Anti-racism is cancer. These people are effectively a cancer. That's what you get, yeah. Man, they say diversity is a strength, yeah. Very strange, all the things that they have to do in order to prove that to be the case.
It is to tackle racism, and I think as we've all been saying, that is at the root of everything we're trying to do. And if we can solve that, and I'm not saying we will solve it in the short or medium term, but then we would have more equal representation and we would have better policy.
Oh yeah. Again, it's fucking so infuriating how they get away with just talking absolute waffle, total bollocks. So now the implication is that if we had better education and museums, etc., in time there'd be equal representation or better representation. So the argument, of course, is that whites won't vote for blacks and all that shit. No, it's because you're a minority in a meritocracy. And as you become a larger percentage of the population, in time, you will start to see a difference in percentage points in all these different areas of work, such as councils, etc. But until such a time, you will get away with the fictitious claim of claiming everything is fucking racist. It's just pathetic shit from these people. It really is boring, mundane, but above all else, cancer. Fucking cancer. Cancer that could be so easily dismantled. Or at the very bare minimum, people could push back on it. Where are all the academics on the other side of this fucking argument? Nowhere to be seen. These people have carte blanche to just talk shit.
Much, Faisal. I mean, these are complex issues, and Parliament will have an opportunity, I'm sure, to discuss them in due course. So I'll put that question to CoCab too. I think it's a question just about how these issues of public debate are debated more generally, how they're discussed.
Yeah, Alison, I agree with that. It's important to recognise that BAME communities, I alluded to it earlier, is that yes, we're interested in racism because we have to be. But believe you me, I would rather not be talking about racism and not be talking about equalities issues all the time. And I know that BAME communities are just as opinionated on all the social issues of the day. And
the problem that they have fundamentally, which is the great irony of all this, is that they have you people like you representing them. People like you are their spokespeople. You infantilise these communities. Not only that, you put them all in a fucking collective. Sadly, in the dying embers of society in Scotland, as everybody seems to be very individualistic and they don't see their fellow countrymen as kin, as a collective, you're trying to force the BAMEs to do so. And to a large extent, they do that anyway. But what is the difference here? You assume that every single BAME wants the same thing. You assume that every single BAME goes through the same thing, and you assume that if you put anti-racist BAME in a position of power, the BAMEs in question that anti-racist BAME would be representing, you assume that BAMEs all around Scotland would be happy with this BAME. They might have been quite content with the white guy that was there prior. It's just fucking cancer. You people are the problem. Fundamentally, it's so patently obvious that a large issue that BAMEs in Scotland seem to have And why all their concerns about other things, they're opinionated on social issues of the day, that gets drowned out by the voices of the very small minority of voices, such as the three pricks on screen, who do nothing but cry, whine and moan about racism, while Graham Campbell's in the background with his megaphone, ducking and weaving the microaggressions. You know? Fucking give it a rest, eh?
And certainly in my constituency, housing is a big issue. Transport is a big issue. Business, local business.
Fucking talk about it then. And these are issues that everybody in Scotland, irrespective of colour, presumably could have or share. Concerns that they might share. But you keep just talking about the BAME issues, the representation, the racism, the microaggressions, etc., etc. And you are drowning out any amicable or mutual agreements and concerns, etc., that white and black could share. That's not the fault of Scotland. That's not the fault of Scottish people. That's the fault of your progressive ideology, as far as I'm concerned.
Businesses, and their experiences are enormous issues. So I think that, in the usual way of community activism, I think that in my experience, it usually starts with discussions within a safe space. So that tends to be local community groups where people get together and share their views, also using online platforms and chat rooms and social media to discuss those. And I certainly make every effort to make sure that elected representatives at all levels, council, MSP and MPs, reach out to those communities to hear their views, rather than making assumptions about what those views are, but actually to listen meaningfully and to engage in that debate. And the other thing that I try to do is also, I know that the Scottish Parliament has various consultations that take place. The Scottish Government undertakes public consultations. So to try and point, you signpost people to make sure that they are taking part by clicking on the website or, getting in touch with the relevant people and making sure that their views are there. But of course, we will only do that by making sure that the Scottish Parliament is relevant to all of our communities. And one way we can do that is by looking like them and sounding like them and making sure.
See? I knew that ramble would pay off. I didn't actually, but see, relevant, that's the second time she's made that reference. And I have skipped about 25 minutes of the video to try and get this video over and done with. But relevant, and until the Parliament should look like them and sound like them. So because it's white, they can't engage. So what you're saying is essentially, this is what they always seem to say, is that the Parliament needs to have black people and brown people in there in order for the black and browns within society to connect, to be represented, to engage. Because a white person clearly can't go to these communities and sort their problems out or speak on behalf of these people in Parliament. Oh, no. But this is the thing, though. They will also tell you, as I said earlier on, that if you put in a BAME into Parliament, that BAME could go to his respective community, whether he's a Hindu or whatever it may be. Then he'll also speak on behalf of all the Scottish and the English, the whites, He'll speak on behalf of them as well as his own community. Of course, prioritising his own community. But a white guy can't do the same thing. It's very strange. Not only can a white guy not prioritise whites, he also wouldn't be able to speak on behalf of the BAMEs. Why? Because he's not BAME. It's so fucking obvious what these people want. Equity, equality of outcome and power. Disguised and masqueraded as eradicating racism and structural barriers and eradicating racial inequality.
Sure that we're open and accessible. So then that encourages all communities to actually engage in
all communities. Yeah, because even if it was relatively BAME, if we increased the BAME percentage in the Parliament, the whites would still, in theory, participate. I mean, both of them. Oh, but so BAME's in there, it would still represent all communities. But because there's not BAME's in there currently, it doesn't represent all communities. The BAMEs don't feel connected, etc. It's just fucking cancer. Their in-group preference is so potent. Lucky them. They're allowed to have one. Whereas we're simultaneously told by people such as the obese man in the top right-hand corner that the even mere idea of in-group preference is a racist social construct made by whitey. Yeah, that's what they tell you. That's what they fucking tell you. That's in some of the anti-racist publications in Scottish academia. Whereas all these people have done, from the beginning of this fucking video to where I'm up currently is indirectly talk to no end about their in-group preference. It's remarkable. It really is remarkable. The fact of the matter is, as everybody always says, diversity means less white people, but it's also about the fact that we're not even allowed to prefer our own. We're even lectured and browbeaten, and the very attempts now are the starting stages of trying to educate it out of us that that's even a fucking thing to prefer your own, while they simultaneously do the exact same thing.
In discussing the big social issues of the day.
Oh, beautiful stuff.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm aware that we're getting close to the end of our time, but I'm going to probably push on and try and squeeze in a little couple of more questions. Can I ask about the impact of Black Lives Matter? How important was the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement on the Scottish Parliament election?
Cool. Oh, can I answer this quickly? It was the most painfully obvious gravy train that I've seen in recent times. Fentanyl Floyd, of course. You know, and that somehow made its way over to Scotland. We've seen protests here. All the anti-racists all over Scotland were out in full force, demanding change, demanding representation, demanding everything, because apparently the death of George Floyd highlighted the rife issues in Scotland. Yeah, okay. It was essentially a gravy train. That's all it fucking was. And as momentum sort of fizzled out for what was the escapade of Fentanyl Floyd, they kind of fizzled back into irrelevance to a certain extent. But you know, the bays are always there.
In May this year, for political parties, candidates and the voting public. I appreciate that Jatan's made the point, I think quite clearly, that this may feel a bit like a debate that's flavour of the month at the moment, but we need systemic change, and we cannot simply let the attention
we need systemic change, apparently. Yeah.
That's focused on this issue die down. But I'm just wondering, I'd like to understand what your views are on the impact of Black Lives Matter campaign at this point in time. Can I put that question first to Faisal and then to...
I'm presuming this must have been recorded in October. I'm going to explain why they're referring to this month, because there's fucking no talk currently about BLM in December. Anyhow.
And then to Jatan.
Thank you very much, Alison. A definite wake-up call for some people.
Basically, what was a wake-up call? What? A man in America was killed by a cop, allegedly. And just because the cop was white and he was black, that sparked protests and riots, mainly riots. Mostly peaceful, mainly peaceful, apparently, though, yeah. Right? That then somehow managed to find its way into the UK and Europe. And the same thing happened here in regards to protests, the same sort of signs, the same sort of rhetoric, etc. And then the same sort of people came out. The activists, the academics, and the politicians. It's all part of the same bullshit that was being said in America. So I don't really know what you're talking about in terms of a wake-up call. What the fuck was a wake-up call like? Because even if George Floyd died due to racism, that does not have anything to do with Scotland at all.
BLM movement encouraged voters to vote more for diversity. It became a political movement. I joined the protest outside the parliament. One of my first speech as an MSP.
Of course it fucking was.
Demanding no more George Floyd.
Demand? What do you mean?
The internet and worldwide communication has its problem. But in this instance, we are quickly able to see demonstration in Australia, have conversation with activists across the globe. So I think it is a very wake-up call and got people out to vote. And that's about it. Wake-up call to everyone.
Thank you very much. Can I put that to CoCab?
Alison, I think that it was significant, but probably not as much as we would like it to have been. I think at that time, obviously, when tragic events happen, and sadly they happen too often, and they do actually happen regularly. So people came together, and I remember...
yes, people are killed by the police or die at the hands of police custody all the time. But guess what? White people die too. And again, Floydy Boy wasn't killed because he was black. And that was the whole premise for the BLM explosion that took place last year. It It was, oh, racism. Fucking wasn't anything to do with that. You don't need me to tell you that, but, you know, that's what the whole BLM gravy train was all about here in Scotland.
An online event where Black people were able to come along, express their views and opinions in the context of, like, you know, dreadful racism in every area. Elected members came along to that and listened to it. Now, I do believe that there were a few parliamentary questions that were put down, and there was a discussion about it. At that time, we only had two, you know, ethnic minority members in the parliament that were there, but I take the point that it's incumbent on everyone to be discussing it. From that, have I seen any lasting legacies? I'm not sure that I have. I'm constantly having to refer back to it. So I do get what Jatin's saying about the flavour of the month. It cannot be that. But what I do think has happened is that the momentum for change, I think, has become irreversible. I think we are definitely moving forward. The younger generation, younger people, certainly in my experience, students in particular, they became very much more confident in challenging racism and calling it out, having the discussion.
Okay, well, there's a few explanations for that. One, it's more diverse, the student population. Two, if we're talking about students, that's what, college, universities, etc., rife with progressivism. And three, just the young in general these days, all completely brainwashed with a completely and utterly revolting, toxic academia education system that promotes nothing other than progressive talking points from start to finish. So, it's not really a surprise at all. These are the same children that are all out protesting for climate change at the age of like 5.
With their parents, having the discussions with their, you know, with their peers as well, and that is fantastic. That is sort of like, you know, everybody doing the job, because we should all be doing the job. It cannot be left to a few of us. And to see people not being afraid of being challenged back or getting that resistance back, they were prepared to take that on, and I think that was a great thing. That now we do have a generation of people whose expectations are high, and so they should be.
Thank you. Jatin, can I ask you about your views on the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, I think for us, it was Black Lives Matter and also COVID almost coming together, and COVID showed the big discrepancies that were
COVID showed the big discrepancies
applying to Black minority ethnic communities.
Yes. Oh, do you know what's brilliant? Because Graham Campbell, that video that I played at the start, he said, I'm going to play it.
Already that Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities are more susceptible to this disease because of the pre-existing reality of the pandemic of racism.
Oh yeah, BAMEs are more susceptible to dying from COVID because of racism. Oh fuck, you give me strength. You know, this was pretty much debunked by the BBC of all fucking places. Some documentary, I remember Sargon covered it, and it was this guy, and he was looking at all the facts and the figures, and he was going around listening to all these experts, etc. And it was just totally contradicting the narrative that, you know, the BAMEs, they're experiencing all this systemic oppression, and that's why they're dying. Now it was, you know, even things such as simple as, you know, vitamin deficiency to standards of living in terms of diet, etc. You know, these were all susceptible factors that made them somewhat susceptible. But now it's just easier to imply it's fucking microaggressions that are rife everywhere around Graham Campbell. They orbit around him, but, you know, and racism, etc. Because every negative disparity within society can be attributed to racism. And you can't prove it because it's invisible. But anyway, I just thought that's what that reminded me of there, sorry.
Etc. And the two things are very much linked together. You know, a lot of the COVID impacts were as a result of social deprivation, which impacts far greater on Black minority ethnic communities. So I think the combination of the two things almost at the same time is what led to you know, as Kokab says, momentum for change. But having said, and so there's a much greater, I don't use that word understanding, acknowledgement of institutional racism out there just now. I think, yeah, I didn't want to use the word understanding because I'm not sure that there's a greater understanding as yet. But obviously, first you start with acknowledgement, then you lead to understanding. So that's where we need to get to. Having said that, I spoke earlier about racial attacks in schools or racial incidents in schools. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the data, the most recent data, but I'm not sure if it's declined.
In there quickly.
And that would...
I am very well aware of the time. A racial incident is any incident that is perceived by the victim to be motivated out of racism. So it could be literally anything. You could get called a dickhead, and the person in question could think to themselves that you'd call them that because they're black. That's a racist incident. Doesn't really prove racism is rife in Scottish schools, but that's the only thing they've got to cling to as clear-cut fucking proof.
Be one of the successes of Black Lives Matter if we stopped or severely decrease the number of racial incidents in schools. I don't think we're there yet by any means. So I hope Kokab is right in terms of momentum for change, but only time will tell.
Only time will tell. And on that note, speaking of time, nice little segue, I'm going to fuck off. Apologies if you get to this part of the video and you've stuck it out this long. I don't really know how to do it sometimes, if I'm honest. But, yeah. Even after cutting out about still the last half hour of this video, this video's still exponentially long. What can you do? Anyway, on that note, I think I'll fuck off. Peace.